Hi, everybody. Welcome to the One Voice Manufacturing Public Policy Monthly Webinar. Happy Friday before Labor Day. This is brought to you by the Precision Metal Forming Association and the National Tooling and Machining Association. I am Paul Nathanson. I am a partner in the Policy Resolution Group. We are part of the One Voice team in Washington, D.C. We provide communication support and work very closely with Omar Nashashibi, who is with Inside Beltway and does the lobbying and strategic consulting and research. And I want to start by apologizing for the noise behind that you might hear when I speak, because they've decided to time the taking down of a tree with this webinar. So that's the noise that you're hearing, that you may be hearing in the background. We have even though it's a holiday weekend and it's August, we really do have a full agenda for you. We're going to start with a little preview of what the Congress has to deal with when they come back from their August recess. There's a lot of things to do in only 14 legislative business days. Lots of regulations, regulatory updates ranging from the EPA to Department of Labor. And I know that as you have all seen, the trade and the tariff announcements are coming fast and furious. Particularly, there's some important updates on the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. So we are going to get to that. Plus, there's many other trade actions that we think could impact your business. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some industry data and supply lines. So before we get started, I do want to thank our sponsor, the Federated Insurance. They are sponsoring this webinar today. We're greatly appreciative. They've been longtime friends and allies and sponsors for us. And I want to turn it over to Federated's Jack West just to make a few remarks before we get started.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Paul. My name is Jack West, and on behalf of Federated, we are excited for the opportunity to sponsor today's meeting. For over 120 years, Federated has supported and promoted the association movement, and today is exclusively recommended by over 500 state and national associations. We are extremely proud of our partnerships with both NTMA chapters across the country as well as PMA National. We applaud both NTMA and PMA for their efforts in arranging the One Voice in Washington webinar series. We look forward to today's meetings and continuing our mission to help your businesses succeed. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul and Omar. Thank you.
Thank you. And Omar, I'm going to turn it over to you because I've used up now 4 minutes. You have 30 minutes to get through these slides. So Omar and I have a side bet. So go ahead, Omar.
All right, challenge accepted, Paul. But though, as always, when I see you unmute or if Caitlin is able to jump on, we'll turn it back over to you guys a little bit here. But this is gonna be quick. I was on the Hill, yesterday, day before yesterday, on Wednesday rather. Quiet, obviously, the last week before Congress comes back next week. The recess is just about to conclude. They always leave this time of year for August. They're coming back on September 2nd. The biggest issue, to Paul's point, is the House only has 14 legislative business days to accomplish what they need to, meaning that the government shutdown is heading towards September 30th. Now, those of you that are on your Wall Street Journal list, you just got a notice here a couple seconds ago that Trump is moving to cut $4.9 billion in foreign aid without congressional approval, and that he's going to do that through potentially a pocket rescission. That's going to complicate things even further and make it even less likely that Democrats, I was with a Democrat on Wednesday, makes it less likely that they're going to lend any votes or many votes to support getting the government funding continued. So reminder, all 12 legislative spending bills have to be completed by September 30th. They're a long ways from that. The Senate completed 3 on August the 1st. The House has completed 2, MilCon VA and then also the defense appropriations bill. I'm hearing, though, next week the Senate's looking to move quickly on the National Defense Authorization Act. We have a number of provisions on which we're working on related to supply chains in China that we're watching closely to see if they get added on there. And then I'm hearing the Ways and Means Committee may try to do some trade work this month, although that's going to be kind of a stretch given everything else that's going on there. That's the Hill. Let's go right into some of the regulatory items. This one is pretty significant. This now goes back to Elon Musk a while back, saying that he doesn't believe the National Labor Relations Board is legal and in of itself is an unlawful agency. So this is part of that lawsuit that's been brought. And this isn't the full on, but what it does say here, and this is, again, not an attorney, but it effectively says that administrative law judges and ALJs are often what the Department of Labor will use, their own internal lawyers that will go and issue a decision upon, and it's binding upon the parties, even without much oversight. So they're saying that these administrative law judges are inferior officers insulated by 2 layers of for-cause removal protection, and that the Supreme Court has already held that these ALJs are unconstitutional. And again, what's happening is these administrative law judges are issuing rulings. In this case, obviously, SpaceX did not like the ruling there, and that the court came out and said that employers have shown a likelihood of success and irreparable harm. So this is now a beginning of a crack in the NLRB structure and runs concurrent with some of the efforts by the administration to terminate personnel, in some cases without cause, and that's what you see in some of these actions. So we'll watch this closely as it progresses, and it's Fifth Circuit, so we kind of knew this was going to happen, but it's very significant more broadly for presidential powers over independent agencies, the Federal Reserve, and others that we're seeing move forward here. For those of you that have to file your EEO-1 data, which is most of you, that is the one that deals with everything from sex, race, and all those in there. EEO-1 data can be disclosed under the Freedom of Information Act filings that can be put out by industry groups, by media, by individuals, and so that the department must disclose these reports on that basis alone, because it is not a commercial product, but it is, again, being collected by the administrations going back a number of years. So note that that is, again, some of the challenges that have been put out on EEO-1. I'm wondering how much this translates over to your 301As on your OSHA side as well. So that's a recent ruling that came out. Switching over to the environmental side, as EPA continues to ramp up, though there is on the, I'm not going to try to perchloroethylene, the PCE, one of the regulations that was initiated under the previous administration. You can see promulgated in December 2024, the PCE risk management action addressed the unreasonable risk of injury and health that was presented by it, and requiring various workplace exposure controls. And the EPA now intends to consider further information received as part of a further rulemaking. So we'll see where they go on this eventually, but this is a reconsideration notice that was just with comments closing today. Also, they had some effectiveness language that you had to be on reporting requirements that were going to come up due towards the end of this year. I think November 17th is now postponing until then some of the original TCE requirements. So we still have some members that are using trichloroethylene, and we've been talking about this, I think, back since 2011, 2012 timeframe, that this day was coming. Note that there have been delays in the elimination of in most industrial settings on TCE, but if you still have it in the shops, please flag this for EHS folks and get this over so they can watch this area and as it develops and moves through the courts as well. The attack on California continues from the administration, particularly as it relates to emissions. This is one that we've known is coming for some time, with the Department of Justice officially filing suit against California over its Clean Truck Partnership related to heavy-duty truck and engine manufacturers. This relates to the California Air Resources Board. We call that the CARB. It's pretty extensive in what the CARB does, and also there's a SoCal version of it that's out there. And effectively, when they create these passenger vehicles and then heavy duty, then you have another collective of states that end up latching on and adopting what California puts forward. And that collective tends to be about a baker's dozen or so of states that go along this. And obviously, an OEM is not going to just create cars for a certain market. They're going to go towards the largest market, which is California. And that's where the background on some of this, where the EPA rather, is saying that California does not have this authority and is partnering with the Department of Justice to push back on what California has done. Speaking of which, on the electric vehicles and other incentives, The Inflation Reduction Act is the law that was signed on August 16th or 12th, a couple years ago by President Biden. This is the one that was dealing with clean energy and issues such as that. The Republicans' one big beautiful bill either accelerated the termination or outright did in certain instances of these provisions that were in there. We strongly encourage you, because some of these, I mean, Republicans obviously hated the bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. They didn't vote for it. It was done through a partisan process known as reconciliation, but there still were some underlying bipartisan provisions in there. For example, the very bottom one is something that we worked on, Section 179D. It's been around for a while, but the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden expanded it. And this is a energy efficiency for commercial buildings. So if you plan placing things in a service, lighting, HVAC, under 179D, you've had some deduction allowances that are no longer going to be permitted in about 10 months from now. So that's something you're going to want to check with your folks on there. Others that are looking at clean vehicles installations, particularly those that might have a service-oriented fleet or have a company car or two that you're using, some of those credits will not be permitted for some of those alternative fuel vehicle refueling properties, for example, being put into service. They do give you some time on a few of them, but for those of us that need to buy a car, like me, you are noticing there's a September 30th deadline on some of these others coming up. So please don't get caught by surprise. Your CFOs, your planning, anyone dealing with any improvements on the facilities, please be sure to check the far left code to see if you're trying to claim any of these before you factor in all the pricing and how you're going to get through this. Here's some additional FAQ that have come along. So I did a little bit out of order, but you saw the first one was the most important. Then they come in here and they go by a breakdown when they get to the individual credits. And so, example, there'll be some FAQs in here. Acquiring a vehicle prior to the termination date is an initial step. But one of the areas that they've really pushed back on is the start of construction. And there's been some back and forth on what constitutes an actual beginning of construction. So that's something else to watch out there. So we're just giving you screenshots of your FAQs. Also, you might have some that are not just putting in for your own facility, but you might be manufacturing a product that received eligible credits based on the supply chain in which it was involved. Usually your OEM is working with you on that. Paul, I know your shop has done a lot of work in this space, but there's just a lot of moving parts on this right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. When the OBB, the Big Beautiful Bill, was passed, they really, the focus on renewable energy and the tax credits that were provided under IRA, they cut them back. And I agree. There's two things that I think the folks listening to this webinar need to focus on. Is number one, the construction start date, as you just said, Omar, because for example, we do a lot of work with hydrogen, and the hydrogen credits that were the credit tax credits that were important to hydrogen. They survived, but the construction date was moved up to, I think, 2027. So you have to, and the definition of what it needs to be under construction is important. And that's my second point, is that Congress passes these bills, and then it's up to the Treasury Department to issue the rules. And that is almost just as important as the actual bill. And so I support Omar's recommendation that you keep close eye as these Treasury Department and IRS announcements are made.
Yeah, one of these, if you're placing in a service in some deadlines, I mean, we've all done projects, us never anything as big as you all do, but lead times are always a problem, and you do not want to get caught because something didn't come in time and now you haven't completed or begun construction. So everyone needs to be on the same page, CFOs, architects, design, everything else here. Appreciate that color background as well. Switching over, this has been long awaited, long meaning back since we heard it was coming in April. But the Department of Labor, Education, and Commerce Department have worked on and now released a workforce strategy. This is separate from their AI strategy. It's got AI incorporated in it, but it's kind of running concurrently to what they're doing there. On this front, are looking at it from 5 different areas. They've got demand-driven strategies, worker mobility, integrated systems, accountability, flexibility, innovation. But a part of it is they're really trying to expand apprenticeships, registered, of course, and dealing with it and strengthening some of the system by supporting the approaches that will be developed to create a larger ecosystem for small and medium-sized businesses, and also partner with some of the business groups that are on here as well. So we see that as a positive and moving this forward. Still registering 1 million apprentices is going to be a lift, and they clearly, and we just got an email from Department of Labor on something we reached out to them on this morning, and they are eager to work with outside groups. So that's just something we're flagging here as the president continues to push that message. Two quick ones. These aren't, you're not necessarily eligible directly yourselves, but your chapters in your districts and you all with contacts in the states might look potentially for some opportunities in government funding that's going from the Labor Department down to the states, $30 million in grants that are going in there for emerging industries, going to the state workforce agencies, up to $8 million each. That can stretch in some states more than it can in others. I encourage you connections with the state workforce boards to reach out to them. Just note on this here in the state of Michigan, it's very specific that the Labor Department in the middle of this month announced it was going to award up to $1.3 million there with regards to employment and training services to directly connected to automotive layoffs throughout Michigan. And this picks up on some of the actions from last year and some of the slowdowns that we saw there. And this administration is continuing to move forward on something that was started by the previous administration there as well. Over at the Commerce Department, they have updated their forced labor strategy. This deals with the Uyghur issues. This is what the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is what that stands for. Something passed by lawmakers a number of years ago. The importance here is for those of you that have come to us in the past and said your customer's asking you for something, you have no idea where to get it. And usually it was dealing with either Russian metals or, again, sourcing certain products from Xinjiang province in China. And this is, again, deals with the Uyghurs. They're now looking to add additional priority sectors to alert companies about the heightened abuse and risk in those, caustic soda and jujubes, but copper, lithium, and steel. And what that typically means for an American business that's working and importing anything, that means there's a number of different checks and balances. The government presumes that it's been manufactured using forced labor if it comes from certain regions in China. And that's that region right here. So again, more reasons why you have to know your downstream and or your sourcing coming and where that's happening for copper and steel. And those questionnaires, expect those to start flowing out if and when this is finalized here in the coming months. Speaking of copper, this is the U.S. Geological Survey. We actually lobbied on this a few years ago, trying to have some things added to the list. What they're doing now is part of the 3-year review. The U.S. Geological Survey is now updating their critical mineral list. We currently have 50 critical minerals. There's another 17 rare earths that are out there that are part of the Section 232 case that the president's looking at. What they're doing now is they're updating. So that would likely mean that any critical minerals 232 tariff action that's taken in the future would likely correspond to this new one. As you'll see, they're doing some additions on here. We'll give you the whole list and we'll flag some of the differences. Again, the reason these are important is that the government places an added emphasis on this, and that means there's additional restrictions on their exports in certain cases on there. They're proposing to add copper, lead, metallurgical coal, potash, radium, silicon, silver, and uranium to it. And they're not officially removing items from the list, but they are looking at those on the bottom side, potentially no longer including them, which would allow for a little bit less stringent on commercial movement of those products. So we're seeing that update there as well. With that transition, let's just get right into where we are on tariffs. We're going to divide tariffs up into 2 sections. So I would welcome Kayla and Paul jumping in whenever you'd like. First part here, we're going to start on countries, and then we'll get into the developments on steel, aluminum, and some of the products. It feels like this happened forever ago, but it's strange that August, I guess, has been so busy. But we did just have quite a bit of action with these new tariff rates taking effect on August the 7th. Again, this is now 3 weeks, so we don't want to go through here line by line. We will flag a few things in here, a lot of back and forth with Brazil, Canada. This is key that the 35% increase that was added, the new high of 35%, it still only applies to non-USMCA products, meaning a good that is not entering under the US, Canada, Mexico free trade agreement. So it's country of origin or substantially transformed. It's not happening up here in the US, Canada, or Mexico. Then it would be hit with the 35%. But the vast majority of goods moving back and forth are moved duty free. Again, steel and aluminum and copper, those do not have such an exemption. And so they are hit with a 50% tariff on the value of the steel or aluminum there as well. China, most goods are still up at 55%. We're going to talk about the EU and India in a little bit here. Japan, the Japanese are coming back to town, yeah, next week now, after Labor Day, I think it is, and they're going to try to finish out this deal because they still don't have something in paper that's been finalized on that. And Mexico's got its 90-day status quo, and the Mexicans apparently are starting to look into maybe creating some kind of a steel import monitoring program ahead of some of the U.S. talks. And before I forget, I was in a meeting this week, and rumors around town are after Labor Day next week, the United States may formally launch the US, Mexico, Canada review process, and I'm hearing the Canadians may start in early October. So that's even just about 30 days ahead of when the US had initially scheduled to move forward. So that's pretty significant there as well. Please note, still no steel agreements when it comes to Japan, the EU, South Korea, UK, or anybody. There's still 50% tariff on that steel product that's coming in. Let's start with the European Union here and where that framework. We're going to do about 4 slides on there, what the EU committed, mutual commitments, US commitments, and then the impact on the 232. And I definitely welcome my colleagues at Bracewell to jump on there as well. Right now, here's what the EU has committed to do. And they reiterated, I think on CNBC, you heard it this morning, that they're going to eliminate all tariffs on all US industrial goods that are going into the EU, which should benefit many of you all that are exporting there. The EU is also going to provide market access treatment, preferential, and then there are also looking at substantially increasing military purchases of defense equipment and all those. This 2 bullets down in the last one in of itself. The EC, the European Commission, basically their Congress, is pledging that they're going to work with the U.S. to provide flexibility. And with regard to the CBAM, CBAM is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism that we've been talking about on this since October of 2023, that the Europeans are imposing a tariff based on a carbon footprint for materials, including, it's been a while, steel, aluminum, electricity, hydrogen, concrete, cement, lime. I think those are the areas. I might be missing one. And though the U.S. has raised a number of significant concerns, the EC has pledged that they'll work with the U.S. on the CBAM requirements and also on some of the corporate disclosure ones, also related to that as well. Also, a few other things to take a look at on the mutual side. Both sides have agreed to work to provide mutual recognition on automotive standards. That's very significant for our automotive industry, as that has been a barrier to entry for a number of years. This goes back even to the 80s and what the Japanese used to say in some of their non-tariff barriers. So this could, if implemented, could be significant to a number of our members. So it's something that we'll be watching closely on how that ends up happening. This no duties on electronic transmissions, that's digital services taxes. And this last bullet here is intended to address China. And that's very significant in terms of getting the US and the European Union back on the same page, whereas they seem to have drifted a little bit apart on, they did a lot better under both Biden and Trump won going against China than I think they have on this round. And those of you that might have seen, I think it was Financial Times yesterday that talked about the European aluminum industry being really concerned about their market and how they're looking to potentially start putting controls on exports of scrap aluminum, because the US isn't putting a tariff on aluminum scrap, and we're seeing a lot of it coming into the States. And the Europeans are trying to make sure that not enough of it or less of it starts leaving where they're coming out of. Back to the US, what they've committed to. This is where it gets really complicated on this one. Give us a second. The US is imposing an all-in flat rate of 15%. So whereas all of these other countries, virtually all, they're getting a reciprocal rate of 10, 15, 20% plus a general duty rate, which can range from 2 to 5 to 10 to 8%. So your all-in China rate right now isn't usually 55% on a tool. It's 58.6 or 58.9 because of the MFN general duty rate. Well, the Europeans cut a deal that you would not be an and. It would not be a combined. So they're not getting 15% plus 2.6, which would be for an import into the United States, say, of a vehicle of 2.5 or of a tool or another product or a machine at, say, 3.6 or 3.9. It's flat 15. So they're saying if a general duty rate falls below 15%, you're going to combine it and bring it up to 15. A general duty rate is above 15%, then you're going to bring it down and you're going to keep it at 15. Simple way is most products coming in from the European Union are subject to an all-in rate of 15%. Here's the however. The U.S. is working to only commit to apply that general duty rate. Again, it's usually single digits to the following, which means they're not going to add the 15% or have a total all-in 15% under reciprocal for a select number of goods. Those that they consider unavailable natural resources, and beyond cork, they include some agricultural goods. All aircraft and aircraft parts, that's significant. It doesn't mean they're coming in zero for zero. It means they do not have a 15% tariff. These aircraft and aircraft parts entering the United States are coming in at a lower most favored nation duty rate of likely getting into the single digits. So they're looking at for other sectors potentially, and we'll see if that could get extended to machinery, but that is pretty complicated if it gets out there as well. So there are some goods that are not at the 15, but are at the lower just MFN as if nothing ever happened. Then we come back to the 232 framework. And on this one, this is where we really don't have action and clarity on steel and aluminum. And that raises a significant area of concern because 50% tariff on steel and aluminum from the EU is still in place, despite this agreement. And we heard this week that the US and the EU still don't actually have legal text. They just have this language, and we pulled it from the European Union, but this is a joint statement. Paul, I mean, this is keep people in limbo here. As you see, with respect to steel, aluminum, derivative products, EU and US will consider ring fencing and TRQs, but still no answer.
Yeah, and we're seeing this in several of these trade quote unquote deals, Omar, is that we have a framework, but then President Trump will put something on social media angered about something that the EU, whether it's the digital tax or anything, that will throw the whole agreement into question. And particularly as we saw on that chart a few slides ago, that there are several regarding the Section 232 steel tariffs, even though these framework agreements have been made, there hasn't been a lot of action. Omar, I found it interesting that this in the end, the last paragraph here, with respect to steel, aluminum, and their derivative products, the European Union and the United States intend to consider the possibility to cooperate on ring fencing their respective domestic markets from overcapacity. That we're kind of like all my life's a circle, because this is how we started really in the Obama administration about creating some global agreement and when overcapacity, I think, is a code word for China, on how the world can confront China's overcapacity, particularly on steel. Obviously there's a lot of other products, but we're talking about steel here that really depresses prices and floods the market with cheap steel. And that's how we started all this. And now we're starting to mention these agreements to fight overcapacity.
Right. Note that it does say in here derivatives. We'll see how that's administered, but this is a process that's still ongoing, to say the least. And the Japanese, from our understanding, are trying to achieve the same agreements on some of these frameworks. So what the US does with the EU might be precedent setting, but this ring fencing, to your point, Paul, and the TRQs, we still don't have numbers. We don't have an indication of where they're going to be on that. China, we know the extent of the status quo. Our understanding is the president is looking for a meeting with President Xi, and that likely could happen in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur at the end of October, around October 30th, if that ends up coming together at the ASEAN meeting. So until then, unless we backslide in some ways or another, which we might, related to some of the metals, we saw some comments from President this week on magnets, rather. But between now and the end of October, if he gets his meeting, we may just have the status quo that's there. This is the one that just took effect less than 48 hours ago. The 25% additional tariff on India. Technically, it's being done part of the IEEPA, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, but it is not a reciprocal tariff. This is specifically applying another 25% tariff on imports from India as it relates to the Russian purchases. So that's a 50% tariff coming in. Please note that this is not an additional 25 points if it's steel, aluminum, autos, or copper, or anything that's already subject to a 232 action. That will still take precedent in the stacking order that's on there. But still, if you are competing with a product coming in from India, even if it's not on the 232 list, it's looking at 50%. tariff that's on there. So quickly, try not to do too much commentary on this one, but here's what's next on the reciprocal tariffs. Yes, we have legal challenges that are moving forward. As a reminder, as always, these tariffs on countries, reciprocal tariffs under IEEPA, will remain in place until a court says they're not. The Treasury Secretary last week, I think he indicated he believes the Supreme Court may actually take this case up in their October term, which means they could issue a ruling sometime in January. And that could be extremely messy. We'll maybe get into that on a subsequent webinar. But still, there's a lot of backup ways that the president can impose additional tariffs, even if he's turned down on this one as well. And then lastly, just to put this in the context of where we are, none of these are free trade agreements. None of them are going to Capitol Hill for ratification. These are all, to Paul's point, they come up with some language and the president changes it online, and then we kind of go from there. The U.S.-Japan agreement is still not finalized, even though they've verbally agreed, I guess. They still are looking at maybe a cap of 15%. The U.S. did last week cancel talks that were supposed to be held with India in India this week, and also with Brazil. And we know the Brazilians passed a law earlier this year to allow them to retaliate, and they're looking to do so. This one may not affect as many of our members, but some of them I do know it will, especially if you're moving some one-off parts between borders and bring them into the United States. What's called de minimis provision of 321 has been officially suspended. What de minimis allows is for you to ship a product, DHL, FedEx, into the United States without a tariff being applied if the declared value for the good is under $800 per day. Congress raised that from $200 almost a decade ago, but now the president has suspended that for everybody, which means that every parcel coming into the United States is, I shouldn't say every, virtually every parcel coming into the United States is subject to some kind of either duty or some kind of declaration. So for those of you that need it, there's the FAQ with the link at the bottom. Those of you that want to visualize it because it's not your problem, here's how much actually comes in. More than 1 billion packages enter the United States under de minimis every single year. By volume, this is the retail folks are going nuts. But this is just when you talk about disruption and disruption at the ports, this will add to that as well. As we round out our trade, now we're going to get into sectoral folks for a few minutes. Paul, I'm not going to make 11:34, but we're going to try for 11:37. We're getting close.
I'll take my lunch.
Yeah, it's on me. Tariffs added steel, aluminum derivatives. This one we've kind of made clear. We all know we knew this was coming, but it is now official. Dankler's count came out to 408. There's a staffer on the Hill that does this. But anyway, we have over 400 parts that were made out of steel or aluminum have now been added to this Section 232 inclusion process list. What this means, not the entire product. If the product is, say, a tool, a stamping, another product that most of our members make, which means it's not actual steel, the entire good is not subject to that 50% tariff. It is just the value of the steel or aluminum in that product that is subject to the 50% tariff. The remainder value of that good would be subject to the country's reciprocal tariff rate, which can range from 10 to 41%. So let's put this in English for a minute. Let's say you have a part and it costs $1. The value of the steel that the importer paid, so you got an invoice and in Made in China, it says they paid 50 cents for the value of the steel. Well, that 50 cents is subject to a 50% rate. So write down 25 cents. That's the 232 rate. Then the non-steel value, which is 50 cents, is then going to be subject to the country's reciprocal rate. In this case for China, it's 10%. So now you're going to add the 5 cents to the 25 you carried over, and the immediate tariff based on the 232 is going to be 30 cents on the value of $1. Then you're going to tariff the entire dollar by the IEEPA tariffs for opioid, which is another 20 cents because it's 20%. So that brings you up to 50 cents, 55 cents on the, yeah, keep it going. And then you're going to add on the 301 tariffs, which are another 25. So you're seeing how this goes. And your product that was $1 from China is probably coming in at about $1.36 to $1.50, depending on the value of it. So that's how specific they're getting. And there's some machinery. So imagine some of the machinery that you all have that might have both aluminum and steel in it and be on a derivative list. We've also heard of an example, because think of copper wires, and you can have machinery that has copper, steel, and aluminum, and the company is now expected to identify all of those places. Actually, before I get to this, not only do you need to know this value of the steel content that came in, you have to know the non-steel value, but also where it came from. The non-steel value, you have to know where it comes from in order to know which tariff rate to apply, and we'll get to that in a second. Here's just some examples that I wanted to show you in here on some of the molds that are included, some of the machining centers in there. You got some parts of dies, you got some metal forming dies that are included on here. I know some of our members do make clutches and some flywheels, so you might get some protection on the right-hand side of it. You might see some price increases from the left-hand side of the screen. That's aluminum. Go to the bottom to get your actual HTS codes on this. You can click on that. As you can see, tools for pressing, stamping, or punching. Those are under Chapter 82. You have a lot of 84 were added in here. If you make parts for motorcycles as well, the good amount of motorcycle was added. This is from the aluminum list in here. I had a client that worked on this on chainsaws and a few others that are getting added. Metal frame furniture also were included on this list. So it's pretty expansive on here with over 400 goods. And this is to what I was referencing, what an importer now has to declare the total value minus the steel content. Then you've got to report down here, what is the value of the steel content? What is the value based on this by weight, the kilograms of it? So I've got some clients that are reporting in, and some of you will have to report in, that it might be 100% by weight steel, but by value, it might only be 35%. And you've got to factor all of that in and apply the tariff 50% on that value of 35 cents on the dollar, if that is in fact the case. Similar for aluminum, you'll see how that is on there. This is extraordinarily complicated in order to be breaking out all of these components potentially if a product appears on that list. So you need to alert all your sales team, your purchasing teams. Note these tariffs do not expire. There is no challenge. There is no appeal. They're on this list until they are not, and they potentially are going to get expanded starting on September 1st, as I mentioned, with the next portal that's coming out there. On the Canada-Mexico side, if it is a steel product or aluminum product, all of it is typically subject to the 50% tariff. If it's a derivative, the tariff again would apply to the value of the steel and aluminum. If it complies with USMCA, the remainder will be just on the remainder is not on it. You don't have a tariff on anything that's out there. So we're watching this one closely, but Paul, when we look at pricing on the markets, this still means we are very much in a captive metals market, and even more so than ever.
Yeah, you see here, this is our twice a month updated steel benchmarker report that shows U.S. prices, EU prices, and China prices and world prices on hot rolled steel. We have updated this chart since 2018, since the Section 232 steel tariffs were originally imposed. The indicator there, the arrow, is where U.S. prices are. As we know, that the important, one of the most important things that folks on this call follow is that the price gap between prices that you're paying for steel versus your competitors overseas. There was a little bit of a dip in steel prices over the past month or so in the U.S. So that gap has narrowed a little bit. It's interesting. I don't show it on here, but we also keep track at the domestic steel utilization capacity. It's at, I think, 77.8%, which originally the original rationale for the Section 232 steel tariffs, now going on almost 7 years ago, is that we wanted to get that up to 80%. It's pretty stubborn. It's always in the 70s, but also I saw a story, I can't remember if it was the Journal or somewhere else, regarding all this capacity that's going to come online by the steel industry. And by the time it comes online, there's a big question if there's going to be orders to fill it, because we're in this cycle that we've seen for 6 decades where the steel industry gets protection, and then since they don't export very much and you are their customers, if the prices get too high for steel, we lose out business from overseas. You buy less steel from them, then their business goes down, and then they want more protection. So we've seen it before, but this seems to be the pattern that we have. It's also, I think, Omar, a general statement on what you just talked about, my head exploded between the last 3 slides, is that the reason that I think people went away from tariffs is that once you start down this road of imposing tariff, it gets really complicated to manage, and we're seeing how it gets more and more and more complicated. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah, no, I think it was a Wall Street Journal on Wednesday that had a great, I think it was in the B section, exactly to that point. They were saying all this steel's coming online and who's going to use it. Well, I mean, we'll see kind of where that goes. A few things to wrap up, just clear out here for the day. Links so you need, for those of you that need more details on what we just went through, because you're right, your head's going to explode, how customs going to deal with the calculations, all these links for your reference are there. Please note this one we've flagged so many times, we'll do it again. You cannot list source unknown for aluminum. You cannot do that. If you do so, it's a 200% tariff rate that applies. We had a manufacturer reach out to us that they did not declare the steel value under a 232 derivative, and customs is now viewing that entire article as entirely made of steel and automatically applied a 50% tariff into the entire value, even though it's not all made of steel. That was the default that customs did. Do not get caught. Make sure your customs people are watching this one really closely. There's more 232s coming, folks, regardless of what happens on 232 coppers and steel, aluminum. We've got another one on wind turbines and their parts and components that with only basically a 10-day or so comment period, that's moving quickly. Lumber, we'd heard that this one is not going to be its own furniture case, rather, but they might include furniture as part of the lumber 232. So that gets expanded. This is our running chart, so you all can keep track of what's coming next, potentially on the tariffs of 25 or 50% on everything from more phones, pharmaceuticals, heavy duty trucks, and there's the wind turbines that's just added. Lots of enforcement action. We just wanted to flag one of them here because it's pretty significant, $12 million in customs and duties evasions. But not only were they trying to evade duties and customs paid and tariffs, what they were doing, they also said failed to ensure that others were declaring and paying the applicable AD and CVD duties owed to the United States on entries of that. So just I'd flag that as well, and that this individual got hit not just for their own actions, but for the inactions of others that are out there. Wrap us up with some data out here. $1 billion under a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, from the Energy Department to deal with some critical minerals and materials. This picks up on some other initiatives that they've had out there in the past and won't have direct impact on you all immediately, but will over time. This one I put in because I've been hearing from members over the summer quite a bit on this one, and especially from last year. Increased energy demand across the U.S. where power bills have gone higher. The PJM issue continues to be a nightmare since July of last year. This is on residential retail prices for electricity, but I assume you all are getting hit as well, and it just shows you the continued increase of the energy prices. This is going to be one of those political issues that in the 2026 cycle becomes more and more of a topic I think that we're going to hear about. Here are job numbers. 3-month rolling average revised down to 35 additions. Manufacturing, we don't have manufacturing yet. We'll have them next week, but the June numbers, so you can have them: 261,000 job openings, 167 new hires, and 176,000 separations on the durable goods job side. That's out there. And Commerce did just release some GDP revised numbers at 3.3% for July. That showed there. They're also now doing it through some crypto for a few reasons that are out there. And lastly, just a couple of other output numbers. Note that the GDP data on the German economy, although I've read that they've gotten a little bit better, this one's hurting a bit. And then LA Port had its busiest year in 117 years. So a lot of folks are trying to rush in goods, and in some case out, and get those done before even more of the tariffs take effect. And that's some of the action that you've seen. As always, you can stay connected with us. One Voice podcast that we will be recording here shortly, and get more into some of the political stuff and what's happening on the Hill as they return. So please stay connected with us there. As always, donate, be supportive any way you can to keep these going. I know we ran, sorry, Paul, a little bit longer, but happy to take any questions. This is going to be, I think, one of those reference slide decks you all are going to need to keep around, especially as it relates to those derivatives, since this is just the beginning of those actions that are out there. So let's please encourage you to type in any questions in the Q&A box. We're happy to try to get to those as we can, or you've got our info here and happy to follow up afterwards. Percloethylene, yes, Paul, I know, I'll work on it. Political science major, buddy, not a chemist. All right, seeing no questions coming through. Appreciate everyone's time today. This webinar has been recorded, and we'll be sure to get the materials out to you here shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.